Welcome to another edition of Take a Stand TV with your host, Christian apologist, author, and speaker, Eric Barger. You can subscribe to our updates and find Eric online at ericbarger.com. Now, here's Eric Barger.
I have personally been researching and tracking the actions and the ideas of many of the globalists since the early 1990s, when I became friends with author and speaker Gary Kah. Some of you probably are familiar with Gary, and Gary's name, of course, has been well-traveled in prophetic circles as he's spoken about this. That is a great book. There are many good books out there on globalism that you could turn to, but that's one that I know we can trust because of my personal relationship with Gary and the way he has approached his ministry and his book. So I think some definitions and background are in order so everybody understands what I mean when you hear the term globalist today. First of all, what is globalism and what do they want? These are questions everybody would have about any new topic. Who they are and what they want and what they stand for, and we'll try to be answering those for you. Here's one definition of globalism for you. Proponents of globalism believe in global citizenship. That is, the problems of humanity can be resolved with democratic globalism. Democratic globalism is the idea that all people matter, no matter where they live, and that universal freedom and human rights can be fostered for all mankind. So here's another definition for globalism, and it comes from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary and says, a national policy of treating the whole world as a proper sphere for political influence. Now, a minute ago, you heard me talk about a definition that came from Wikipedia, and you saw it on the screen. Well, it talked about global citizenship or citizens. Well, what does that mean? Is that just a flaky New Age idea? Maybe it came from somebody who had too much LSD in years past and sounds really far out to people. Where did that come from? Well, you'll be surprised to know where it came from. Rod Stewart is on the homepage here of globalcitizen.org, and you see Oprah Winfrey down here in the right-hand corner. And I know that she is a New Ager, so her spiritual beliefs I know about. I don't know about Rod Stewart, so can't say for sure about him. There's Bill and Melinda Gates on their Gates Notes blog, their website. What in the world is a global citizen? Well, you know, after endorsing that their readers joined the group called Global Citizens, whose website I just showed you, back in 2015 in their annual January letter, the Gates reinforced this same idea, this same point, with another letter that they released in July of 2015. You know Bill Gates to be the co-founder of Microsoft, where we get the Windows platform from. And for many years, he was listed as the richest man in the world. But he and other globalists are active in many far-left fronts, such as population reduction, income equality, open borders, common core education that Gates came up with, actually, gun control, and in the case of Bill and Melinda Gates, medicine, in particular, vaccines. Here's another picture of Bill Gates, and he's called for a global government many times. This one happened in 2016, this particular article. But for many years, he's been repeating this idea of a one world or global government and how that is the only answer for mankind. And we have heard this again and again and again from so many voices and people who have gained influence in the world. And with Bill Gates' money and the way he has spread it around, he has certainly bought himself, as I've said before, a seat at the table. No matter what table you're talking about, he gets a seat there because of the amount of money that he has put out and put into these causes. Here is Global Citizen, and that's the current picture. That is June 4th when that slide was taken. And it, of course, has the protesters on the front. And we certainly understand what the protesters are doing. And some of them are very valid, and some of them aren't. We should all abhor the killing of George Floyd, the man in Minneapolis who was killed. And America should support the right of people to have these peaceful protests, but we should equally disdain the idea of paid looters and paid rioters who are organized and who are been trained And really, they're part of these organizations that are 2 or 3 steps away from some of the globalists who want to destabilize America. And I think there's good reason to believe that Hungarian billionaire and probable poster child for globalism today, George Soros, is really who's to blame for this particular thing. The most notable anti-American one-worlder, he was born in 1930. He made his money as a free market hedge fund manager. Imagine that. But in 1992, he turned his attention to incrementally collapsing nationalism whenever possible. He's promoted the ideas of a one-world government or globalism through the Open Society foundations that he's put together, funded these foundations with an estimated $32 billion. George Soros sees governments and laws, social order, and nationalism as a detriment, and Soros is personally responsible for much of the untold amount of carnage that has been strewn around American cities in protests. But this is really nothing new. George Soros sees governments and laws and social order and nationalism especially as a detriment. He was a substantial backer of Hillary Clinton back in 2016, and Soros is personally responsible for much of the untold amount being spent to defeat President Trump today. If anyone is responsible for the New World Order, George Soros is certainly a man who's responsible for it, and he is trying to forward that cause at any cost. But just how much Soros is able to bend the news the way it's reported, that's really a question for us to consider. If his influence throughout the media is mind-boggling, and it certainly is, could his spreading the wealth reach into either the areas of the officials of our cities and our states and even our federal government so they would look the other way while Antifa trains and stockpiles items to be used to incite riots in our cities? I think those are fair questions that I've written down about how George Soros and his money is being used. Well, continuing our definitions, here's another definition, but this one's from a conservative viewpoint. And it again defines globalism, but certainly different than what you heard in the first 2 definitions. Globalism is a liberal and authoritarian desire for a one-world view that rejects the role of sovereign nations in protecting values and encouraging productivity. The ultimate goal of globalism is the eventual unification of humanity under a one-world government. Now, that is a definition that I could definitely stand for. I'll give my okay to that one because that definitely fits the way I see what globalism is. Well, what are the globalists doing? Just by definition, globalism, like communism, sounds so good, so fair, so equitable until you understand what it really means or until you get sideways with the system. To succeed in bringing about their goal, globalists are using a sort of divide and conquer tactic to bring anarchy to any free market system wherever they can and denigrate any successful economy. Those drawn to globalism are usually enticed because they are brought to believe that they personally can benefit from it if they're near the top of the food chain, or because they've come to be predisposed about a particular idea in the world that needs to be forwarded that the globalists say they're for, such as the idea of man-made global warming or climate change. You see, a good economy and patriotic people are the arch enemy of globalism, that's for sure. Today, those who wish the destruction of free countries are learning to effectively manipulate ethnic and of course, economic strife. But in the end, and that is the key, how it all turns out, if globalism succeeds, the continuing struggle of one world advocates will be to rein in the God-given individual freedom that we're each born with, because regardless of race or nationality, all people must acquiesce to collectivism, and that's really what the bottom line of globalism is. That's what globalist promoters never explain to those whom they hope to recruit. In the end, how individuals are viewed would really be dependent upon a person's allegiance to globalism's worldview and their personal worth to the cause. It might go something like this. If you follow the one world edict that would be in control, and go along with the suggested plan, then everything is fine. Well, not really. It's not really fine, but let's pretend just for a minute that it's just wonderful and you're brain dead and don't know any better. However, if one becomes outspoken, that is, the porridge is too hot or this porridge is too cold, remember where you've first heard that? Well, if you complain too much, in other words, and if a person projects the idea of self-determination, or God forbid, makes stands against the established one world guidelines, you might find yourself on the outside without, for example, your food allotment or your freedom to travel. Kind of sounds like China today. Or your ability to live wherever you like. Again, sounds like China. Or even your state-granted permission to have children. That's right. Understand, in a deeply globalist society, that privilege will only be granted to those that the authorities believe can raise good little global citizens as children. And so once your freedoms are gone, don't count on ever raising a family in a normal way. And if you ever had a problem with the elite, you can count out a lot of other goodies they have for you too. In fact, forced sterilization will become common in a global society. The UN has been beating that drum louder and louder for decades, and Bill Gates himself and the globalists look at him as their self-proclaimed science and planet care and family planning guru. He's been repeating this belief that we must, that is not just should or we should consider, but that we must begin to radically limit population growth. That's interesting when you look back and you begin to see this one world plan. It's interesting to see how it's all come together. But we can go back to 2010 and see what Bill Gates is saying in a very nonchalant fashion. Let's look at just one statement from a TED Talk he did back in 2010.
First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3.
Now, Gates has repeated this call going back to the early part of the century and really beyond that when you get down to it. And you can be sure that population control is at the center of his universe.
The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Let's find out what he means by that. His father was the head of Planned Parenthood at one point, and that could tell you something about what he learned as a child and what he was raised on. And maybe that's why the global elite see him as such a positive, besides the fact that he has billions and billions of dollars and isn't afraid to spread it around and to spend it in any way he can to gain what he wants to have happen.
My dad was head of Planned Parenthood, and it was very controversial.
In fact, it really already is the system that they want, if they could just convince the rest of us to go along with it. And once again, speaking as if I was a globalist, as if they had taken over, if you do have offspring, if you do have children, and then you begin to doubt or openly reject one world beliefs afterward, then your rebellious ideas could get you penalized. And for example, your choice of school for your child could be taken away, but that could be a very small thing, a minor issue. Just keeping your own child in your home would prove to be a task. Already, social planners are speaking about your children as if it's their children, as if they own those children. As parents and grandparents, if we don't wake up, far too few of us in this generation and in the next generation. I'm 69 years of age, so in my generation and the next generation, far too few understand that the possibility of rejecting globalism is before us, and if we're not careful, that possibility will pass us by. We need to understand to use our strength and energy in the right ways concerning this. One man understands the tyrannical movement packaged as if it were the savior of the world, and That is Donald J. Trump. And whether you like him or not, Donald J. Trump stands against globalism, and I'll give him a gold star every day of the week for that. Listen as he walks into the belly of the beast and proclaims, "Not on my watch."
The truth is plain to see. If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique.
President Trump, like all of us, is imperfect, but I suggest that the relentless attacks against him, including being spied on by our own FBI before he was elected and after, and having his national security director framed in the early days of the administration, and the constant cries and investigations claiming collusion or conspiracy with Russia or Ukraine, which led to a phony impeachment trial, was more than just political. No U.S. president has ever withstood such opposition. And why? I believe a main reason is the tremendous opposition that's come toward Donald Trump is because he's a credible threat to the deep state. He's the most credible threat in decades. And because he openly campaigned against globalism and in favor of nationalism and populism in 2016 and loves the flag and loves America, as we all should love our countries, well, he is a real threat to them. The coronavirus pandemic, with the help of Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and Dr. Redfield of the CDC and that subversive guy, Dr. Tedros from the World Health Organization, and with Bill Gates funding each of those organizations, and we believe funding each one of those individuals as well. Well, this was the kind of catalyst needed to bring down the globalist number one enemy in the United States of America is it. And as soon as they realized what they had, well, I believe they understood that the coronavirus could be a great tool, a weapon. And the far left and the globalists, which are oftentimes the same things, decided they would just subvert the next election by using this. And I believe that the governors of our states, especially when you look at the Democratic governors and the way what they have done and how slow they've been in opening up the economy again and the way they have treated the pandemic, it's obvious they're trying to tank the economy in any way they can, and they work to destroy the best economy in recent memory, maybe of all times.
Thanks for joining us for Take a Stand TV with Eric Barger. We welcome your comments and questions. Please visit us at ericbarger.com. Be sure to tell a friend, and please join us again for more Take a Stand TV with Eric Barger.